We're back at it with House of Sky and Breath. This week we're covering chapters 18 through 37. So for this recap, I'm going to be standing so as to retell it faster and more succinctly. So I'm not sitting here late into the night talking for hours. We pick up Tharian. He takes a risk and he ends up telling Ethan everything that happened at the summit because Ethan didn't really get the memo on how Sandriel and Micah died. He only knew what he heard when he was on the call with Sabine during the whole summit, and because he was left in Crescent City. So he finds out Micah was the one that killed Connor, and he's not happy, but he's happy that he's dead. Ethan then left home alone while Bryce is at work and everybody leaves, and he knows that she has Danica's sword still in her room, so he goes and finds it, and then he's like, man, this is just such perfectly weighted, and he literally starts fake fighting enemies around the apartment until he's standing on the coffee table, and then Bryce walks in because she forgot her ID, and then he's like, and then the table breaks right at that moment, and inside the table there's like papers that fly everywhere, and they're like, what the heck? There's no drawer in this table. And so then Bryce is like, what are these? And she starts looking, and it turns out they're papers from Danica, and they're school papers and like newspaper clippings and stuff, and she's like, this is weird. And then we move over to Rune. He then tells Flynn and Deck about everything that just happened at lunch with Cormac and Adis and all of that jazz, because he's like, they're my best friends and I went through my ordeal with them, so obviously I'm going to tell them. So now they're caught up on everything, because he is like, I have to go meet with Cormac because I can't have my father know about my little mind power thing, so I'm gonna have to go do it, okay? So then he goes to the bar and he meets Cormac, and then Cormac's like, yeah, no, I would never have really told your father, and he's like, well, I'm here now, so clearly your threat worked. So he's like, okay, here's the deal. We used to use these crystals, like special crystals that can communicate with each other because they all used to be part of one whole and some jazz like that. And this one is the one that used to belong to Sophie's little walkie-talkie special thingy, whatever. And so maybe you can use it and use your mind powers to use it to connect to the one that Agent Daybright has. So he's like, okay, well, I guess I can do that, you know, why not try? He's like, who's Daybright? And Cormac's like, nobody knows. Like, it's somebody on the inside. So honestly, it could be an Asteri for all we know. Like, we don't know. Bryce and Ethan then are looking through these papers, and Bryce finds mention of Dusk's truth, which is one of the things that was inside an email between Sophie and Danica years prior. It was Dusk's truth and something about Thur. Then Hunt is showing Baxian around the comitium, and he's explaining like what a video game console is, because Baxian's like, what the heck is that? And he goes, it's a TV. And he's like, not that, I know what a TV is. What is the thing underneath it? And then he's like, oh yeah, you play video games, you know, for fun. And Baxian's like, fun? And he's like, okay, I'll teach you about that tomorrow, because he's trying to get home to Bryce so he can have some good quality time with her, if you know what I mean. Hunt arrives home, and as promised, he and Bryce are having a good time. The problem is Ethan is still in the apartment, and he's a wolf, so he's got quite keen hearing, so they're trying to be quiet, but not the best at it. So Bryce is going down on Hunt, and then Ethan yells across the apartment. He's like, please, have sex louder. I didn't hear it all the first time. And then he continues to yell back and forth, and then they stop. But anyway, Hunt falls asleep. He then has a dream, except for it's not a dream, where he's sitting in a chair but he can't get up, so it's like he's strapped, but he has no visible straps. And he's in some weird in-between place, and he can hear like these leathery wings moving around behind him, but he doesn't see anybody. And then the Prince of the Pit himself starts speaking to Hunt. His name is Apollyon, and he tells him he's not using his power to its full potential. Him and Bryce. He's like, you guys are conduits. You gotta be get your practice in, like, up your game here, okay? Because I need a worthy opponent, and I haven't had one since Peleus, and I want a better one. So up your game so we can hash this out. Then Rune. He uses crystal, and he successfully makes contact with Agent Daybright. And in his mind, it's like a bridge, And then she appears as like a fire person, but not like Lahaba, who's a sprite, but like made of flame, but like still has like features. This is more like flames in the shape of a person, but obscuring. You can tell Daybright is a female, but that's it. She just looks like flames. And then he's like, oh shoot, should I have like hid myself? But then looks down and sees that he is like, looks like night, like stars and galaxies or something. So he's like, okay, cool. So they're talking. He's not very good at hiding info about himself. Not that he's like explicitly been like, I'm Rune Danon, but he definitely talks about Crescent City, and being the Ox. So she's like, they must have been desperate if they set an office here. So anyway, he is like, hey, just wanted to let you know, like, one, I just wanted to see if this worked, and two, we just need to let you know that this is the new method of communication. She's like, cool, I like this better. And then she leaves. And then the Triari, they get called to Celestina's home, which is crazy because like they very rarely ever have been to an Archangel's home outside of Sandriel, but that was different circumstances. Anyway, Pollux and Baxian are already there, and they are both beat to a pulp. And this has been like 12 hours after said incident, so like the fact that they're still look beat up, like they were pretty beat up if their advanced healing abilities haven't healed them this fast. So anyway, Hunt learns that Pollux was getting handsy with a girl in a bar, and Baxian had told him that things work differently here, and then she was saying no, and Pollux was like, that's just what they want to say. That's just what they say when they want you to chase them and all this stuff. And he was like, no. If she says no, you have to stop. You don't get whatever you want here in this place. And so then he beat him up in an alley when he took the girl in the alley, and she kept saying no. Except for the problem here is that they were caught on camera, and it was recorded, and then it was on the internet and trending. So the Asteri sent a gift to Celestina, pretty much as like a warning to get your Triari under control, I guess. And so that is that Celestina is now to be mated with Ephraim, who is he's the Archangel that replaced Sandriel and has the other half of Sandriel's old Triari. So she's now to be mated in a month around some holiday that's like the Day of the Dead, their version of Halloween or something. Anyway, so that means that in a month, the Hind and the Harpy, and possibly the Hawk, they're all coming. So Hunt is not looking forward to that, but also is happy that he wasn't the one in trouble this time. Celestina then tells Hunt, after everybody leaves, she holds Hunt back, and she basically was like, dude, I want to let you know that I was friends with Shahar. And he's like, man, I never heard Shahar talk about you. Kind of crazy. And she's like, I want you to know that I was friends with her, and like, yeah, I have some regrets, but I can't change them because I clearly didn't fight with you guys on that battlefield, and like maybe I could have, but can't change the past. But I want you to know that I did everything in my power to try to buy you. Like, she talked about you all the time, and I knew that if anybody was important to Shahar, like, I wanted to be important to me. So I tried to buy you 3 times. I amassed the funds, and I was denied 3 times by the Asteri, and then I had to stop, otherwise it would be suspicious. But she's like, just know that I did try. And then he's like so touched by that, because he's like, oh my gosh, is she actually a good person? Okay. And so then he's like, dang, she really just wants to be friends. So he's like taking that under consideration, that she really is just like, hey, let's be friends. And then Ethan goes with Therian, because Therian's like, I can see that this guy, he needs to get out because he's just a lone wolf now, and he clearly's been through some stuff, and I could use a good sense of smell. So he takes Ethan with him along to go see if they can find a meal and look for his scent. They find some dead bodies, whatever, and then Ethan uses his nose and tells Therian some other things that he picks up and whatnot. They have a little bit of bro bonding, becoming friends or something. Then we have Rune and Bryce go to train. They're going to train just in a separate session, and they're going to meet Cormac somewhere, so he's going to teach them about starborn powers, mostly Bryce, but you know, Rune's got a little bit, and also there for support in case Cormac tries to be a butt. But on their way there, Bryce is having a nice moment with Rune, inviting him pretty much to like Christmas at her house, her parents' house. And he's like moved. He's like, oh my gosh, I would love that. Like, if I could, I want your mom as my mom because she's awesome. And then Bryce is like, you're literally older than her. And he's like, I don't care. Like, and so then after this moment, Bryce looks away for literally a split second, turns back, Rune, gone. And then she sees he's being dragged down into the sewers by a freaking Reaper. And she's like, what are the odds that a Reaper just like snuck up here? Reapers are anybody who pretty much died and then decided they didn't want to be dead. And so then they swore their souls and their sort of lives to the Underking. And then they can live like half-lives. So they're already dead. So they're just like gross zombie things. And then I picture them literally as like the Grim Reaper type-esque, where they wear like robes and stuff, but they move very creepily, like eerily smooth, and they're just silent, I think. Anyway, Reapers take him, so now she's like chasing him down into the sewers. She gets there, boom, there's like 15 Reapers, and she's like, holy F, this is a lot of Reapers. Rune unconscious in between the Reapers. He's got the Star Sword on his back, but just full on, whatever they did, he's zonked out, okay? Bryce is like, holy crap, how do I fight off this many Reapers? And then they start talking to her, and she's like, why are they talking? And they say that they were sent by Apollyon, and that he pretty much kind of gives like a similar message to her that they gave to Hunt that was like, learn your powers. And she's like, I was freaking on my way to learn, you idiots. And they're like, yeah, well, speed it up. And then somehow she ends up getting a hold of the sword finally. This is the first time like fully taking the Star Sword, because Rune kept trying to be like, it's your sword, it's as much your sword as it is mine, so like just use it. She's like, no, I'm not taking it from you. And he's like, girl, I don't care, like use the sword. Okay, so now this kind of forced her to use the sword. And then Cormac shows up and he starts grabbing Reapers and then teleporting out, and they're like, bruh, you can teleport? And then he comes back and he's like, use your light, blind these fools. And she's like, duh. So then she starts blasting like a Care Bear type deal or something, and then blast these Reapers, and the ones that are not blind and shrieking, she uses the Star Sword and she starts chopping and fighting away. And then the crazy thing is, Reapers are dead, so you can't kill what's already dead. So like anytime people are like, watch out for Reapers, it's because you can't do anything because they're dead. But her Star Sword, for some weird reason, she slices them and they're like disappearing. They're like being wounded and then actually like dying, which is kind of crazy. So she gets a few of them, and then the rest like flee or die or get teleported away by Cormac. And then finally Rune wakes up, and it was crazy. Meanwhile, while that was happening, in Rune's mind, he's on the bridge, and Agent Daybright's like, wake up, Knight! Oh, she gave him the nickname Knight because he didn't have a code name, and so she's like, I'm just gonna call you Agent Knight, and he was like, works for me. So she's like, Knight, wake up! And then he's like, what's going on? She's like, I don't know, you kind of called me. And he's like, I don't think that I called you. And she's like, I think something's happening, like you must have fallen unconscious, but I feel like something bad's happening, so like you need to wake up. And he's like, I don't really know how to do that. So she's trying to wake him up while the whole Reaper thing is happening. So anyway, he finally wakes up, and then realizes he doesn't need the crystal to talk to her. It just needed that to initiate that connection, and then that was it. So anyway, that all happens. They make it fine. It's great. So then later on, June and Fury and Bryce and Hunt, they all go to the meat market to go search for Emil, just in case he happens to be there and not the Bone Quarter as they suspect. And that's when Hunt is like kind of surprised that like Juniper's all like gung-ho about being like finding this kid and like being in the meat market, even though she clearly looks uncomfortable. And then Fury's like, let me tell you what happened. There's these fighting pits the Viper Queen has, right? But once you're in, you're really hard to get out. Juniper's brother, many years ago, he got himself in the rings, couldn't get out, ended up dying in the rings, and then they like just dumped his body on Juniper's parents' front porch and everything. So she has a special hatred for the meat market, which makes it all the more special that she showed up for Bryce to search for Emil there. And Hunt's like, dang, that's some crazy lore. So anyway, they find nothing for Emil in the meat market. And then Bryce is frustrated because there's just nothing. She can't find any more clues. And then she's like, I'm going to the gym. And Hunt's like, cool, I'm coming to the gym with you. So they go to the gym that's in her apartment building, and it's just them in there. They're doing their workout, doing some push-ups, whatever, until they realize they're alone. They start getting a little spicy, and Hunt uses his magic, his little lightning, to short circuit the cameras and then lock the door, or like hold it closed or something, I don't know. And then he starts going down on Bryce, and then there was windows on one wall, and so then he uses his wings to block the view that he has. So we have a fun little tidbit there. And then they go back to the apartment. Then later that night, they're getting ready for bed, and then Bryce is like, so what do I call you? And he's like, what do you mean? She's like, well, calling you my boyfriend just feels weird. Like, boyfriend just doesn't seem like the right word. And then he's like, I could call you my mate. And she was like, I need you to understand what you mean when you say that, though. Because, like, in the fae sense of the word, is very different from what I'm thinking the angel sense of the word is. Like, mates to fae are, like, irreversible. You say mates, you're basically already married the minute you declare that. And, like, there is no going back. And it's, like, super big deal. And he's like, yeah, angels, you kind of just, like, sure. It's basically just another word for husband and wife. Like, it's important, but not, like, that crazy important. And it's definitely not like a whole, you see someone, you're like, oh my gosh, we're mates immediately. Like, literally the archangels, the Asteri are the ones that determine which archangels are going to be mated. So clearly it's not as strong of a word. So she's like, I just need you to know that I don't care if you call me that, but I'm letting you know, like, what will happen if you do start calling me that, and like the actual significance if you call me that. And he's like, mates it is. And she's like, okay, cool, so we're mates now. So they just decided that. Then Rune meets with Daybright again, and she's like, got info, there's a shipment with a Asteri made mech suit, or a veneer made mech suit or something, and it's coming on this train, whatever, get that info out. And he's like, aye aye ma'am, sends that info to Cormac. Okay, now Bryce and Hunt decide, all right, we're gonna have to go to the Bone Quarter because there's not much other places left for where this kid could freaking be hiding if he's in the city. And possibly Sophie if she's also alive. So, they got some black marks or death marks or whatever they're called from Jezebel. They got 2. And then they send them into the river so they can get the creepy black boat coming and take them. But as they get in the boat, guess who freaking shows up behind them? Baxian. Just stalks them right out of the bushes, and he's like, pretty sure people have told you this, but that's like really stupid for you to go over there. And he's like, but I mean, I am new here, so what do I know? And they're like, don't say a word, sir. And so then they leave. And then they go to the Bone Quarter. And then a lot of ish happens here. Basically what happens is they talk with the Underking, and then he's like, no, I know literally every single being over here, and it's impossible to sneak over here without me knowing, sneak in or out. And one, the Reapers are not mine. Like, everyone is accounted for. And just because they're Reapers doesn't mean that I sent them. Reapers originally came from hell. So I'm not surprised if some of them decide to change their allegiance back to there. Also, there are lots of other, like, Bone Quarter equivalents across the world. So, like, they could be anybody, but they're not from me. Second, I know that there are no living beings on this island, I guess if it's an island, on this island except for you two. So that's a no as well. And then Bryce is looking around. She's like, dude, I saw green hills and like meadows, and it looked like a paradise over here. What the heck was that? And then the Underking's just kind of like, hey, you saw what you want to see, you know? Life is full of comforting lies, what can I say? And she's like, I don't like that answer. And he's like, well, I don't know. Suck it, I guess. So then he also happens to admit that he samples souls. Turns out what happens is when a soul comes over the Bone Quarter, if there's enough left, he sends them into the Dead Gate, which is just the gate that's over in the Bone Quarter. Sends them back in, and then happens to sample the merchandise if it looks good enough. And so then turns out they're actually just being turned into first light, but in this case, second light. So literally they're just being turned back into energy. So all the dead people fed back in. And they're powering the city. They're helping power the city along with all the first light. And he usually, you know, waits a couple centuries for like the friends and family and descendants to kind of forget about them, and then will throw them into the gate unless they cause problems, and then he feeds them in faster. So it's sort of implied that the pack, because of the problems they caused last spring, he fed them in sooner, is what it's implied here. Anyway, Bryce and Hunt are mortified to find out that dead souls actually don't rest here. That's a comforting lie. They literally just get fed into second light, so they're sickened by this. And then he's like, hey, by the way, Bryce, I know what you did in the spring, heard about it, and you did that outside of the Elysian system. He's like, you still have some first light. And I really want to taste how nutritious and delicious it is. And she's like, oh boy, we're not leaving here alive, are we? And Hunt's like, absolutely not. So they go into fighting mode. Turns out the Under King has a pet. I think he calls it the Shepherd, but I don't remember, so somebody can look that up and verify if you really care. Turns out this thing was left over from like the first wars with the Prince of the Pit and all the demons and stuff across the Northern Rift. Just left there. Everyone forgot about it, and so then it became the Under King's pet, and it's like some dog demon thing, and it helps shepherd all the souls to the gate for those runners that don't want to be fed back into the gate. So this thing, he sicks it onto them, and then not only is it this creepy looking dog demon thing, it splits into 3 separate dogs of one mind, and they start chasing Hunt and Bryce. And so it's not going well. It's dark. They're, you know, running somewhere. They don't really know where they're running. Bryce is trying to blind, but, you know, you can't blind what you can't find. And she's also using Danica's sword, and Hunt's using his lightning and stuff, and it's a tough battle, okay? And then they have this idea. They come back together after being separated. They come back, they're by the gate, and then Hunt is like, you know, Sophie had these Thunderbird powers. She could use First Light as power. And, like, my powers are kind of similar, and so curious if maybe I could do something here. And he's like, Bryce took power from the gate, so, like, what if I took power from the gate? So they're standing right by the plate. So he puts his hand on said plate, okay? And then he charges, he, like, uses the First Light, and it, like, supercharges his body into, like, some strong, I don't know, lightning or something. And then as he's about to shoot this at, like, the dog or something, Bryce is like, double idea here, jumps in front of him with said sword. Maybe she has a star sword, actually. I actually lied. I think she has a star sword, not Danica's sword. Doesn't matter. Either way, she's got a sword, okay? She uses the sword, boom, stands in front of the lightning, so the blast hits the sword and then ricochets and, like, refracts or something, and they end up defeating said demon thing, and then they end up speeding to the water because they're like, best bet is get off this island. And then luckily for them, Therian was below reporting to the queen when he noticed there was a lot of lightning happening above and that it wasn't his queen's lightning, and so then he was like, I'm pretty sure they're going to the Bone Quarter today, so I should get myself up there. So he meets them in his little wave runner thing and is like, hop on, and they, like, don't waste a second, they just run and jump and then land, and he takes them and they fight some river monsters that try to eat them for trying to escape the island, but they defeat them easily. Therian does, actually, anyway. So they make it back and they're safe. And then they unfortunately have to tell everybody that they learned about Second Light and everything, and that kind of destroys poor little Ethan's heart, but, you know, such is life. Okay, next. Turns out the Hind and her retinue of dreadwolves, they show up already in the city, and Ephraim gets there and has, like, the world's most awkwardest encounter with Celestina. It's just real awkward and uncomfy. And then, unfortunately, while they're over in the Bone Quarter trying to survive, poor Rune and Ethan are also trying to survive. They, along with Cormac, are meeting to give the info that Rune had gotten about the whole shipment thing. They're meeting with some contact that's disguised in an alley as, like, some beggar or whatever. Cormac's doing his thing, and Ethan and Rune are, like, standing there, whatever. Horrible, because guess who shows up at the other end of the alley? Freaking Mordok, the head of the Dreadwolves. He stands there, turns, because he can smell something. Rune's obviously in his shadows with Ethan, and Cormac is there now too. They're in their shadows, but he walks over to where the informant had literally left, like, just minutes before, smells the ground, can see all their footprints everywhere leading to, like, the shadows and everything. So even if he couldn't smell them, he darn well could see their footprints. They're all panicking. All 3 of them were like, this is not good. This is very much not good, okay? And so then Rune, talking to both of them in his brain, is like, hey, this guy wouldn't happen to know any of your scents, right? And Cormac's like, no, I don't think that he would know mine. And then Ethan's like, yeah, he would know mine. And Rune's like, why would he know your scent? And he's like, well, turns out that Mordok actually came to the den some years back, and so like he could have definitely sent me there because I was there. And so then he's like, also, I guess I should probably just tell you now, that's Danica's father. And they're like, what? You tell us this now? And he's like, I mean, she's dead now, right? So yeah, that would be the male who is Danica's father, and that is the reason she has her bloodhound gifts, because he is a bloodhound. And they were like, all of them are like, not good, double not good, because he can scent, if he can scent them, he can also scent, you know, who all knows what else, all the things, all their bloodlines and whatever ish. So they're like, we need to go. And so then Cormac is like, I can only teleport one person at a time. So he's like, okay, you take Ethan. So then they bloop go out, and he's like, I won't be able to find you in your shadows, so you're gonna have to meet me at the end of the alley. So then it's just Rune there, and Mordok's getting really close, and he's like, I can smell you. And then Rune's just like waiting for a distraction, and then there's some like movement, or I don't know, throws a rock, whatever. It's classic, barely a distraction happens, and then he takes that moment to sprint to the alley and then grab Cormac, so they teleport out right as Mordok turns. So they're praying that Mordok did not get any glimpse of them, because that would not be great if they were caught in an alley with a guy who's an Ophion rebel dude, if they knew that anyway. To cover their tracks, Rune had Cormac take him and Ethan to a bar all the way over in Fyro, because they were not in Fyro. I don't know where they were somewhere far. So they are in this bar, and then they purposely immediately walk into the bar with all the cameras and talk really loudly, and Rune's like, so I'm guessing you're wondering why I asked you here, right? And then he tells Ethan, he's like, play along, like mentally. So Ethan's like, yeah, you know, what's up? And he's like, well, this is real, but also I was wondering if you wanted to get out of that apartment with Bryce and Hunt, if you want to come move in with me and the guys. And then Ethan's like, wait, really? And he's like, well, I mean, you're not an angel, so yeah. Why not, you know? And he is like, okay, yeah, because he's like, I definitely would like to get out of that apartment. That would be great. And then, unfortunately for them, they are not in the clear yet, because who should walk into this bar but the Harpy and the Hind walk right in, okay? And they come straight to them, and they're just, the Hind is immediately just playing some mind games or something. She's asking them questions, you know, and they're like praying that she didn't already happen to talk to Mordok and suspect stuff, and they're like, she can't know that we're working with Ophion, right? Like, this is, yeah! And they're like just panicking, and then she's like, let's play a game, and like playing some card game, poker or something, I don't know, whatever, and she's totally playing them. And then she moves from her target being Rune to being Ethan, and then she's like, she basically just exposes him, and poor Ethan reacts, which, you know, only gives her more validation that she's right. But she basically was like, oh, you were in love with Bryce, weren't you? But then your big brother was too, so you stayed behind and you focused on Sunbow, hoping one day she would see you, and then big brother dies, and then you hate yourself more because the traitorous thought, the first thing you thought was that the way was clear for Bryce. And then Ethan's getting really angry, and then Rune's like, calm down, like she's trying to rile you up, and it's working. So anyway, they escape narrowly, and then that's when they all convene and they share all their information together. And then Hunt has to go to Celestina's little mating party thing, and it's real awkward, real uncomfy, but she's like, hey, thanks for coming in on your day off, and please, like, you know, be here for me as a friend. And he's like, I got your back, don't worry. And she's like, thank you so kindly, sir. And so they're all there, whatever. And then unfortunately Bryce is at home with Ethan and maybe Therian, I don't remember, maybe Rune too, I also don't remember that. Anyway, Ethan and Bryce are definitely there, and unfortunately Bryce didn't, the door, like, no somebody knocks on the door, and she doesn't think right away, and so she just goes to open it, and who should be standing there but freaking Sabine? And so naturally she just attacks Bryce, and then everyone's like, no. And so then they text Hunt, and they're like, Sabine's here. And so then Hunt's like, I gotta go. And even though he promised to be there for Celestina, he's only been there for an hour. And so he looks at Isaiah, and Isaiah knows. He's like, oh, something up with Bryce. And he's like, I gotta go. And he's like, you take care of it, I'll distract him. Baxian sees this, and he's like, I'll distract him. And so he takes Baxian aside, and then he just goes to the balcony and then bloop, falls off and flies away. Shows up just in time. They all stop Sabine barely and they're like, girl, stand back. I don't even remember what her problem was this time. I guess I'll look it up. That's right. Sabine shows up and she's like, you can't stay out of wolf business, can you? And so this is when she found out Ethan was staying there. And then, she's like, he was exiled and you're harboring him. And then Ethan's like, yo, Perry Ravenscroft, whatever, she dropped me here. And then she's like, Perry's a fool. And then they start getting in a fight. And then low-key, Ethan starts standing up to her, giving off some alpha energy. And then Bryce is like, oh snap, like this is kind of crazy. So she teams up with him and then they go off after Sabine. And then Rune's there and Hunt gets there, and then they basically pressure her enough to leave, so she leaves, but she's like, stay out of wolf business, and being all pissy about that, okay? And then they end up being all fine, they're all good. But then, Ethan definitely is like, yep, Rune, I'm gonna come live with you, for sure, because he did not like the reminder of how he's totally was in love with Bryce and probably low-key still has feelings for her, and he has to live in this apartment where she and Hunt are clearly together anyway. And so he's like, yep, I'm moving out, okay? And then we get a little flashback of Ethan and the first time he met Bryce, and he was going over to his brother's apartment to meet some girl that he said was like the awesomest girl in the world. And then on his way there he runs into this hottest girl he's ever seen, and they talk for 10 minutes in the hall. And then Connor sticks his head out of the door and is like, oh, I see you already met Bryce. And then Ethan's heart sinks because he's like, no, of course this girl that I immediately fell in love with and was like, she will be my wife one day, is the very girl Connor was talking about. So then, pretty much everything the Hind said, totally spot on. So unfortunate for him. Oh, and then Baxian also showed up. He followed Hunt to the apartment when Sabine was there. And then he also tried to help backing up Hunt and the gang and being like, Sabine, get out of here. Anyway, that happens. And then, so Ethan moves in and he's like, cool, this will be good. This will be totally fine. And then Therian and him meet up again and he's like, hey man, we are gonna go somewhere and Bryce is gonna hate it. And he's like, we don't need to tell Bryce, freaking Ethan. And then Therian's like, nah, we do, because I value all my body parts, so we're gonna tell her. And we're going to the Mystics. And then that's where we know they're gonna go next at some point. But then, unfortunately, Hunt gets a call to go to Celestina, so he goes, he meets her in her office. She's really disappointed, like, super disappointed, okay? Because she's like, I need you to know what this looked like, because Ephraim and I both obviously knew that you left, and it looks like your girlfriend is a Fey princess, and it looks like you chose helping a Fey princess over your archangel, your governor, and, like, politically it looks bad, even if you tell me, like, it's not like that, it was just helping with a personal matter, like, it doesn't look great. And also, you told me you'd have my back, and you were only there for an hour, so, like, I'm really disappointed and hurt by that. And he's like, man, it actually hurts me that I hurt you. Kind of hating this whole thing about you being nice. So then her punishment to Hunt is to remind him where his priorities are, is that he needs to stay in the barracks for the next 2 weeks, and so he can't stay with Bryce, and he can't take her to a nice hotel and a nice dinner and a nice date, essentially. And so for 2 weeks it's basically grounded, and so he's like upset but also like valid. So then they leave, they being on Hunt leaves, and then who's waiting for him but the Hind? And so he just treats her like he normally used to treat her, just cool indifference. And then she starts questioning and she's like, yo, are you friends with Rune Danon? And he's like, I mean, like, I wouldn't say we're friends, but, like, we hang out. And she's like, cool, what about, like, Therian Ketos? And he's like, I mean, he's a decent guy, okay? Ethan Holstrom's like, yeah, why are you interrogating me? And she's like, oh, it's just kind of like a strange group to all be meeting all the time. And then he just is kind of like, well, I didn't realize, like, sleeping with Pollux would be so boring. Anyway, they're talking about a bunch of stuff, and then he's just kind of pushing her off, since it is a bit of a weird group. And then Baxian shows up. Then there's a weird exchange between Baxian and the Hind, because the Hind is the one that stops short when Baxian shows up, and Hunt's like, what the? And he just goes, Lydia? And she goes, Baxian? All formal, like, kind of strange, okay? He's like, I was looking for you. And she's like, is it to explain why you vanished into the night with Athalar? And then Hunt, like, passes him, and then Ever super quietly is like, don't say a single word about what we were there. And so then Baxian's just like, I don't answer to you. And she's like, no, but you still answer to the Asteri, whose will is mine. The end.